Okay, now that we've learnt how to factorize a quadratic equation, so we've learnt how to get those brackets either using a pattern or a formula or using the cross method, we're now going to look at quadratic equations. So a quadratic equation, remember, equation will have an equal sign in it. And when we solve a quadratic equation, so we'll end up with x equaling something. Sometimes a quadratic could have, generally we see two solutions, but it can have one, or sometimes it has no solution. So what you're actually doing is, if you were to graph a quadratic, it will look like a curve like this, and when you solve it and you'll get two answers, you might get x equals something. It's actually when it's crossing the x-axis. So that's when, if you had two answers, it would look like this. If you had, if there was no answers, it means maybe the quadratic graph is up there and it doesn't cross the x-axis. Or if you have one answer, it might have done something like this. But for us, we're just mainly going to learn how to solve it, and in the following years, you'll talk more about the quadratic graphs. So let's have a look. So a quadratic, when we say a quadratic is in its general form, it looks like this: the ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So the first step for solving a quadratic equation is to have to probably pop it in general form and have the right hand side over here equaling 0. Okay, so the first little questions we're going to do is they're going to ask us to rearrange the following equations to the form ax squared plus by plus c equals 0. So we want to put everything onto the other side. So like with our equations, if we move it over an equal sign, it does the opposite. So over here, this is plus 4x, so on the other side, it's minus 4x. And over here, negative 3, on the other side becomes plus 3 and equals 0. So there we go, we've rearranged that one. So with this one, it's okay that we're just going to rearrange. So we'll move all these over and make sure they do opposite operations to let it equal 0. So if you group like terms though, we'll put the 2x squared near the 5x, and then if I do minus 2x, now that 4x becomes minus 4x, then I had plus 3, I didn't move that, but the 12 becomes plus 12 equals 0, then just tidy it up, that's 3x squared minus 6x plus 15 equals 0. So there we go, we've got it in general form. So you can see that we've got this ax squared plus a b term plus c, and we've got equals 0. We've got general form there. Okay, sometimes when we get the quadratic and it looks in this format where we've got a squared term minus a constant, which means just a plain number. So we're missing essentially the bx part. We can just solve them normally. So if we were to solve this normally, remember we would try to get the x by itself. Okay, so we're going to try and rearrange. So I bring that minus 18 on the other side, becomes plus 18. Then I'm going to move this 2, it's timesing, it divides. So I get x squared equals 9. Now the opposite to squaring something, so if you have something squared and you bring it over the equal sign, the opposite to doing that is the square root, and it's always plus or minus. So if we go to do that here, so we're going to go x equals plus or minus the square root of 9. Now the reason it's plus or minus 9, because if you think about it, negative 3 times negative 3 equals positive 9, and so does positive 3 times positive 3 equals positive 9. So when you find the square root of 9, you're not really sure which one it is, so that's why we write it's either plus or minus. So when you do this answer, you end up with x is either plus or minus because the square root of 9 is 3. So there's like before where I said it has two, you can have two answers. So you can say x equals 3 or x could equal negative 3. There's your two, this one has two answers. So if we go about doing this second one here, we could go about the same way. So let's move that 27 over. It becomes a positive 27. Now I'm going to move the 3 over, and it's timesing there. So we're going to divide on this side. So we're left with x plus 2 squared equals 9. Then we're going to do the opposite to squaring. So I haven't moved the 2. So we've now got plus or minus square root of 9, which we know is plus or minus 3. And now I'll move the 2 over. So I could then get x equals plus or minus 3 minus 2. So your two solutions, so one solution or answer could be x equals plus 3 minus 2, which equals 1. So there's 1 time. Or the second solution could be x equals minus 3 minus 2, so x equals negative 5. So there's your two answers. Okay, now we're going to look at when we have the other way, when we've factorised our quadratic, and we've factorised it and we've got it into 2 brackets and we're saying it equals 0 because it's now we're looking at equations. We can use this law, which is called the null factor law. And the null factor law states that if the product of one or more factors, so these, when they say factors, we're talking about things that are times together. So we've got here 1 or more. When those factors are times together and it is 0, at least one of the factors must equal 0. So all it simply means is once you've got these factors here, the null factor law states, and that means when you see this, you're allowed to write that x minus 5 equals 0 or x minus 2 equals 0. So once you've done that, we just need to rearrange to get x equals. So we'll go x equals positive 5 or x equals positive 2. So there's your two solutions for this quadratic. Okay, so if we look at the following, solve each of the following quadratic equations. So this quadratic equation, alright, so because it's factorised, we can see the factors and it's equaling 0. We can let each factor equal 0. So I can x minus 2 equals 0 or 2x plus 1 equals 0. And once again, we rearrange. So if I brought that over, the 2 would become a positive. So there's one answer. It could be that. Or now let's rearrange this one. This would be 2x equals negative 1. The 2 is timesing, so it'll divide. So we could say x equals negative 1/2. Okay, let's keep going. So here, because they've got factors, we can say, and they equal 0, that means we can therefore say 4 minus 3x equals 0 or 6 plus 11x equals 0. So let's keep rearranging. Let's bring the 4 over, it'll be negative 4. And then to get x by itself, it'll be negative 4 divided by negative 3. Remember, a negative divided by a negative becomes a positive. Okay, with the next one over here, we would move the 6 over first. So remember back with equations, we had to decide what had happened. So x was times by 11, then 6 and added to 6. So we move the 6 first, and then we get it by itself, and just leave it in the fraction form, that's fine. Okay, now with this one, don't be careful, that is still a factor. So what we can say is we can say x equals 0, and that's one answer, or x minus 3 equals 0, and just keep rearranging till we get it looking like that. Okay, just down here I've listed the questions we'll do on Monday. Thanks.